Hello, friends. Welcome to the panel. They'll be here in just a moment. Today, we're going to be discussing the North Carolina case where the Supreme Court recently overturned the decision that nurses could not be held liable. And now they came out and they said, yes, you can be held liable. And social media took off. And all I saw on my page for like a good week was like, oh my gosh, nurses are going to be arrested everywhere and held for everything. And we're going to be discussing how that's not quite true. But maybe we'll look at what is actually true and because it kind of has, it's not as bad as the media is kind of making it seem, but it still has a lot of implications that we don't love. We're going to go through the entire article, or kind of articles relating to what happened, why it happened, and do some legal detectiveness. That's why I'm in my Supreme Court seat, clearly. And then we're going to go through I'm actually a nurse and a nurse practitioner licensed in the state of North Carolina for a few more months. So I will share some of the information that they actually sent us in terms of like, hey, this is what we think all nurses should know and all nurse practitioners should know. And then we'll read some snarky emails from the North Carolina Board of Nursing where they just kind of talked in a really mean way. And you were like, I don't like this, as well as going over implications of what this kind of means in terms of like, maybe you should check this out in your state board of nursing and like how nursing is kind of slowly changing in the legislation, or not legislation. Where is it where you get sued and stuff like that? How it's kind of becoming a little bit more, whatever that word is. And we're seeing that more. Okay, friends, let us bring in our wonderful panel members here. We have Chad, we have Mama Nurse, Vanessa, and everyone who's in the chat, welcome. Hello. There are oodles of you today. Why don't we leave? Tell us what you had for breakfast. That sounds better. Instead of where you're from, just tell us what you had for breakfast. I had what I have for breakfast every day because I have ADHD, so I eat the same thing every day for like 10 years and then I get sick of it. Plain yogurt, Greek yogurt with strawberries and muesli. So, would you like to introduce yourself, panel, and let us know what you had for breakfast?
I am Chad. I'm a midwife, practice in the southwest of the United States. And same thing I usually have for breakfast, just a cup of coffee. Cream, no sugar.
That's hardcore.
Yep.
So I'm Vanessa, also known as Mama Nurse. I'm a trauma surgical ICU nurse, and I had coffee, French toast, and eggs.
Ooh. Oh, that's nice. Very official. Look at you go. That sounds
awesome.
Gotta
feed the kiddos.
Very true. You feed them much nicer than I feed mine. I'm like, well, this is a Belvita. Let me open it for you. Here you
Bagel
are.
and cream cheese.
Exactly. And if any of you notice that Nurse Scott is not here, he will be here. He will be here in a few minutes. I know some of you will ask because he's pretty much my other co-host here. But he's in his semester started. So he has like obligations where he has to like do group projects. And like, these people have jobs apparently, not all of us just sit at home and rant on the internet all day. Chad might disappear because he has to go deliver a baby. So, things are going to happen.
Yep.
CK Medic says, oh boy, snarky official emails. Yes. Well, I read them as very snarky, but we'll see how it goes. Nurse Corky had coffee. Perfect. Cody, hello. And welcome everyone. Okay, perfect. If you are watching this on the replay, hello and welcome. We will probably have timestamps just in case we go off topic. Just in case, which will almost positively happen. Okay, so let's take a look really quick and see what occurred and why people were so sad. They were so stressed. And it made me very stressed for a moment until I was like, okay, wait, I'm going to put my Scott hat on and be like, this is going to be fine. This is probably not as bad. It's just kind of bad. Nurse Adrian, hello. Also, Mama Nurse has a YouTube channel and a whole platform. We're working on Chad, and you can find it in the description below. We're working on Chad because don't you think you want midwifery from Chad's perspective, right? Don't you want that? I want that. We're going to work on it, but you can definitely find Mama Nurse down in the description below. You need her in your life. For as like ADHD and spazzy and angry as I am, Vanessa's like, everything's fine. Let me help you.
Always.
Here's my rational advice. And I'm like, burn it down. We haven't decided where Chad is on this scale yet. Oh Where are you on that scale, Chad? Just
You
out of
know me.
curiosity.
It took you 6 weeks to invite me to a discussion, so it's because I'm far too outspoken. I'm with you, Liz. Burn the whole thing down and let's start over.
Perfect.
This
I love
isn't
it.
working. This is not working.
It is not. That was nothing about you. That was me having a lack of ability to read emails. I look at the number and I'm like, oh, that's a big number. I'm just going to ignore it as if that's going to fix it. It never does, but maybe one day. All right. So here is, all of these are going to be linked down below in case you want to take a peek at them. The North Carolina Journal, no idea if that's a good article or not, but they had a nice summary. So the North Carolina court voted to overturn a 90-year-old state court precedent that protected nurses from legal liability. And we're just looking in the state of North Carolina right now. What this basically was in 1932, the Supreme Court saw a case in North Carolina, Byrd versus Marion General Hospital, where basically a doctor told a nurse to put a patient in a closet to help treat some kind of condition. Because, back then everything was like hysteria and yada, yada. And the patient like overheated and had a lot of medical problems due to being locked in a closet. And it was found that the nurse wasn't liable because the doctor shouldn't have told her to be in a closet. So they were like, well, let's just say it's 1932. Nurses have a lot less autonomy. So if the physician tells you to do something dumb, like in the middle of summer, lock someone in a closet for hours, and you do it, well, you silly woman, because it was all women at that point. You couldn't be married. That's the era we're talking about. You had to wear the hat and the dress. And once you got married, you couldn't be a nurse anymore. Make it make sense. We should do a chat one time all about weird old nursing laws. Anyway, deviating. So the law said, hey, if you follow an order, maybe you should have used your little pretty woman brain, but we understand that it's really hard for you ladies to really think things through. So you won't be held liable in the event that you do follow the silly man's decision. Because sometimes, even men can make mistakes. So fast forward 90 years. We are living in an era where nurses have a lot more autonomy. And there was a case, and a little 3-year-old girl, was in the hospital. She went under anesthesia, and the anesthesia provider did not notice that the patient had her oxygen tanked. And basically she was without oxygen for like 10 to 14 minutes. And now the little girl is a teenager, but has severe cerebral palsy. She has developmental delays. Obviously, this is something that requires like 24-hour care. And she did not have those things going into the surgery. So clearly an error was made here, and a CRNA was the one administering anesthesia. However, this same law still is in existence. North Carolina is not at all an independent practicing state. So you need, as a CRNA, a midwife, or a nurse practitioner, those are advanced practice nursing providers, you need a collaborating physician to oversee your practice. You can't do anything on your own. And so in this case, they said, well, since you have a collaborating physician who is probably rotating between ORs, not entirely sure how that works, but that sort of seems like how it goes based on my understanding of seeing our CRNAs via YouTube. And so technically there was a physician there, so you can't sue the CRNA because you could sue the physician instead, because the nurse was exempt to this 1932 ruling. Clearly, we're in a very different situation, right? The 1932 being locked in closets. But this protected the person, and the family went, and the way that things get to Supreme Courts, in case you're unfamiliar, is the law came down and they said, no, this 1932 ruling stays. And the family said, that seems stupid, which, I agree. I think if you are a healthcare provider, you shouldn't be excused from everything just because you live in a state that has an affiliate provider. The family said that's stupid. They took it to an appeals court. The appeals court couldn't make a decision. So then it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overrode it. And that is where we are today. So the Supreme Court basically just said, actually, never mind, that's a dumb rule. It's 90 years later. Let's repeal that. And you can now be held liable as a nurse. Now, obviously, this went on fire, and there's a lot of issues with it, and we will look at the issues with it and what is not great about it, but that's kind of the basic context. And we'll have thoughts. Chad, I had muted you because it was echoing back just a tiny bit, but now I unmuted you. So if you see that, no, you're fine. If you see that, that's me. Thoughts so far? Roads so far. Does that make sense, chat? If you have any questions about that, let me know. Sometimes when I'm recapping things, my brain, it doesn't do a normal path. Okay.
It makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm personally not mad that it got repealed. I will talk about what I wish would have happened instead, but I don't think overturning that law in general is bad, because you shouldn't be able to do wild things. This would put all the responsibility on physicians, which this is a huge issue in North Carolina. If you've ever practiced in North Carolina, is it can be very hard to get a collaborating physician because so much liability falls on them. Fun fact.
I'm kind of on the fence with this one, honestly. I agree that certain people in healthcare should be held accountable and some people shouldn't be held accountable, but it kind of depends on the incident and how it happened and things like that. So I think it's just that fine line of when are we going to say you're going to be held accountable for this and when not.
Yep. There's a lot of nuance to it, which is what we're going to talk about next. A lot of nuance to it that they kind of just were like, well, nope, never mind, flip over.
And as a nurse, you're never really going to be asked to do anything. Well, you shouldn't be, I guess. You shouldn't be asked to do anything illegal. If the doctor says go in and stab that patient, you're not going to do that. That's an obvious something. But some things are just, well, I'm the doctor, and because I said so. And as a nurse, you're supposed to decide what's a real order and what's something you can ignore.
Yep. So. And the thing that I think about with that, so now that they've kind of repealed it, the implications of what this means, and we'll spell it out here in a second, is nurses can now, before you were completely protected. If a provider wrote an order and you as a nurse followed through with it, or you were working as a nurse practitioner in collaboration with a physician and you did something, and even if you were doing it like it all together, or even if you weren't doing it together, it would go to the physician and they would be the one that could be held liable, not you. You as a nurse could carry out an order that was dangerous. If you did not catch it, you could not be held liable. And that is where we're going to see some issues here, because now that protection was removed. And so the thing that makes me nervous about all of this is if you say, oh, you should have known that that was a dangerous thing to do as a nurse. You did not catch the mistake. Before in North Carolina, you had protection against that. And now you don't have protection against it because they said, well, you should have known that this was a bad idea. And this makes me think of that case that we did a while ago with the physician who was giving like the huge doses of palliative medicine, like huge doses, and in a situation like that, if an order was huge, remember when they were giving like 200 or like crazy amounts, 1,000 micrograms of fentanyl, would that then, if you went through and it was the unit culture to be like, oh, well, you just kind of do what they say and they ordered it and you gave it, now you could be held much more liable, like the nurses actually were in that state. And they said, you should have known, like you should have looked at this and maybe questioned it. That's a tricky situation because that situation itself has a lot of nuance to it, but that's kind of where my mind goes, is if you flip it over without any nuance, it makes it very, very difficult in that situation. And underpaid nurse, thanks for becoming a channel member. I appreciate you. If you are a channel member, I appreciate you, first of all. And second of all, I just put up a rant about my poison ivy and about the hospital where none of the nurses clocked in and the CNO had to go. And I came up with a lot of imaginary situations. So check your feed for that entertaining video where I overshared and showed you my nasty rash. It's getting a lot better, but you get to see that, the weird things that you put on the internet. She's underpaid nurse said, I'm wondering about med techs. This only applied to nurses. And someone else had asked, let me see. Oh, okay. Kimberly Davis said, okay, I'm confused. What does the CRNA's actions have to do with taking orders from the provider? Since you're a nurse, this law overturned for nurses and nurse practitioners and CRNAs and nurse midwives. So since everyone is still under the title nurse, it applies to both. So that's how the lawsuit that they were looking at was against a CRNA, but the trickle down from this is all nurses, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how it gets put all together in the same pot. Now, let us take a moment and look and see why this can be complicated. So, like we said, if you're turning this over completely, you're not looking at the nuances of the situation. Typically, we would have a situation where the legislature, so the Senate and the House of something, clearly, I know a lot about the law, they would look at it and they could write into a bill or enact nuance, right? When the Supreme Court overturned this, they literally just said, we're going to undo that. Zero anything. And people are angry because the Supreme Court was the one to overturn this. And the Michigan or the North Carolina Nurses Association is kind of looking at this and saying like, whoa, friend, you should have just said, we're not sure. Let's take this to the legislators and try to make a nuanced act to kind of encompass like, hey, if you are out there, maybe if you are an advanced practice provider, we should edit the North Carolina law for advanced practice providers and not necessarily apply this to like all nurses in this way, because is it really fair to kind of lump the two together? Why there's no nuance here? This should be something that should be like a conversation. No one on the Supreme Court has any healthcare background. So they were like, you don't really understand how this works and like what you're saying. Like, so why are you weighing in on it? And that's kind of what I got from that. Is that also a concern that you have, or are you not worried about that, team?
I'm concerned with that as well. It's just, I don't know, nursing is just too broad for them to just leave it open like this, and it's worrisome.
And as you pointed out, there's different levels of nursing now. Back in 1902, 1837, there wasn't. There's either a man who was a doctor or a woman who was a nurse, and never shall the twain meet. Now you've got CNAs and LPNs and RNs and advanced practice and everything in between. And as an advanced practice provider, in the state that I work in, I don't have to have a collaborating physician. On the other hand, I think any mid-level provider who works without a collaborating physician is a fool. But that's just my own opinion.
I agree.
But you need somebody to bounce things off of, and at least once a day, I go to the doctor that I work with, and I throw a chart in front of him. I say, I need you to discuss this with me, or I need you to see this patient with me. Come in the room with me. Somehow get his name on the chart. Right. So that I've gone to the edge of my knowledge, and my knowledge is done, and I need somebody else to put their eyeballs on this. And so you didn't have that back then.
Right.
So
exactly.
it's very antiquated law, and you shouldn't hold an LPN to the same standard that you hold me or an RN or anybody else.
Right. Or even if you're talking about like a med-surg nurse and a ER or ICU nurse, not saying that any one is better than the other, but at the same time, there's a different level of knowledge and education. So how do you compare the two and fault them,
And what if you get floated? Yeah. Like with how short staffed we are now, what if you get floated? Like, what if they floated me, a med-surg and a peds nurse, to the ER? And someone came in and I was like, well, like this seems fine to me, and it's not fine, or like I do something. And then they could just come back and say like, well, you shouldn't have followed that order, even though you've never seen it before, because you're dumb. Like, yikes. Yikes.
Well, yeah, I mean, so you get some nurse off of med-surg who goes to work the ICU, and she sees an order for Drano IV push.
Yeah.
She pushes it. She doesn't know. How would she?
You're like, oh wow, that's how they unclog these things. Wow,
right. And it's a situation where I don't even know what to ask. I wouldn't have the foggiest idea that this is a bad order. I just.
And before you say like, oh, that won't happen, I have been floated to an ICU as a non-ICU nurse, and they just tried to find me the most stable human because they did not have other humans to go there. And they're like, well, it's better to put a peds nurse into our peds ICU, seeing the patient populations who are just like a little bit intubated, like just a little bit more, it'll be fine.
Like being almost pregnant.
Exactly. Like, and so this happens, this does happen. And this is where I see this being like, since we don't have nuance to the conversation, it was just like, yeah, this is fine now. And knowing that North Carolina is a fairly, they don't stand up for their healthcare workers. That makes me nervous. As we see, the nurse that worked, I did a video a long time ago about the poor gentleman who he died in jail because the people asphyxiated him. And now the guards are not getting in trouble, but it's in North Carolina that the nurse is being criminally charged for his death. So like, that's the environment we're working in North Carolina. This is in Charlotte. Charlotte is a little bit more using of their brains, but still, that's North Carolina for you. So I thought we could look at, just to try to see, because you're like, oh, okay, well, this is getting overturned. Like I said, have a license in North Carolina. So they sent out this. They said, okay, you have to, due to this ruling coming out, you have to do this 1 hour of continuing education. And it kind of points out how narrow this road of like, now you're liable for all your actions, which sounds like, well, duh, you should be, but like how easily that line now could be tipped to like, you could make an error that could cost you your license, that could cost you your livelihood. You could get sued for tens of thousands of dollars. You could, who knows, get criminally charged, since that's what we're doing now. And it wouldn't be as difficult as you would think, right? Because we think big errors like, oh, well, I'm not going to make a huge error, but let's go through this. And we can kind of on our panel say, I think I have probably made some of these mistakes. And apparently this is what from the North Carolina Board of Nursing, this is what they say they would deem neglectful. Okay. And neglectful is the bar that we're looking at here for where people can now be held liable. Which one is it? This one. Okay. So this is the 1 hour CE or continuing education credit that you have to take. It goes through and it says nurses have like a duty to care for everybody. You can look at the Nursing Practice Act, and this is kind of how we're going to decide if your action. So say you went to court and someone said, well, based on your Nursing Practice Act, because the Nursing Practice Act, most states have them, not all of them do. And this is what, if you're ever going to get sued or you want to know, like, can I legally do this in my state? Like if someone says, hey, I want you to interpret this x-ray and you're not sure, like, can I actually do that? Your Practice Act it'll spell it all out. And this document is basically what is deemed liability in terms of your Nursing Practice Act. So if you were in court, this is kind of what they would look at. So it says, this is all basically just a bunch of negligence occurs when a nurse fails to meet the needs of a client due to a breach of the standard of care or an act of omission. So saying if you don't do the things that are outlined in your Nursing Practice Act, or you make a judgment call that other people like wouldn't make, because what happens in these situations is you sit in front of a panel of like, they have like nurses that come in and they say, does this make sense? And the nurse can be like, yes or no. And depending on how mean that person is, you can run into interesting situations where you're like, that is not, it's kind of up to the judgment of that person. It's a mess. Legal nurse consulting. The Joint Commission defines negligence as a failure to use such care as would be reasonably prudent and careful, and a careful person would use under similar circumstances. So it's not well defined, right? Which we have seen in some other. Nurse Adrian's here, thank goodness. She actually she knows about law. Perfect. Nurse Adrian has an excellent TikTok. We'll leave it linked down below. The issue with this is. So let's say you get sued, right? You get sued and someone brings in, let's say it goes to a jury and they bring in a nurse and the nurse says, I wouldn't have done this because I am, this is not a mistake that I think I would have made. Or they might say, that's totally, I can see myself something like doing. It then goes to the jury who votes, and they're not medical people. So this is very much up to like, that's where this gets scary is it's kind of like, well, if I screw up and then it goes to a jury, like, and I get a nurse who's accusing me, who's really grumpy and says, I would never make that mistake, even if most of us would, then it goes to a panel of people like, off the street and your whole license and your life can be charged by this. And there is no well-defined parameters here, especially. And so now North Carolina nurses are kind of like, well, would most people do this? And it's like, well, that depends who you ask. So that's not helpful. Here are some things that they said, and it starts okay. You're like, okay, it would be considered negligent to fail to perform CPR. Okay, like if someone does not have a do not resuscitate order and you don't perform CPR, fair. Failure to administer medications or perform treatments. This becomes mildly problematic when you read through it and you see that, like, what if you didn't have time? There we are. What if you didn't have time to administer medications? Then if you don't give them and then like someone has something terrible happen, they could come back and be like, well, you didn't give their blood pressure med and then they had a stroke. Like, that's problematic. Sleeping on duty. Not ideal, but there's nothing written into these that says like, oh, hey, staffing was awful. You had 8 patients instead of the 5 or 4 you were supposed to have. You had 3 ICU patients instead of 1 that you should have had in this situation. Like, where do we look? So like, that's not there. There's no nuance to it. So that's what makes this scary. You shouldn't sleep while you're at work. Fun fact. Don't sleep. I like how they included a picture of someone sleeping. Like, they're like, hey, Susan, go over there and pretend to sleep. Great. Perfect. And then it goes out and it explains in great detail, why you shouldn't sleep. Nurses, I can't. Why did we waste all of this time? The North Carolina Board of Nursing, though, has several resources that can help you stay awake if you do need that. You should also, if you fail to assess, this one made me particularly nervous. Scott's here. Welcome, Scott. Scott's YouTube channel is also in the description below. And this one makes me nervous because if you fail to assess, like, what if you didn't have time to get in there? Again, going back to if we're understaffed, and it literally says like, it is your responsibility to check for changes in condition. Like, nurses can observe, monitor, or assess a client more frequently than ordered if deemed necessary based on their clinical judgment. So if you think I should have assessed them more, but I didn't because that's not what the order said, can I get in trouble now? Like, now that this is like overturned, like, where does that line go? It talks a lot about how assessment is an ongoing process and shall consist of determination of nursing care needs based on collective interpretation, and saying like, if you don't keep assessing them, early warning signs in deteriorating patients can be subtle and require nurses to complete a thorough assessment continuously and monitor the needs to reassess the client. But if you have 8 patients, how are you supposed to do that? And then failure to make home visits. Most of us are probably not visiting patients at home, so that one's less effective. We're going to go through the case scenarios, which is where this gets really yucky, but initial thoughts. Team, hello. OB Nurse Chelsea, hello. It's been a minute. If you ever want to come back, we love you. Someone the other day was like, where did Chelsea go? She needs to come back. She's amazing. And I was like, yes.
Well, I think that this speaks volumes into acuity within staffing. This is something that in California, even with ratios that we really, we were mocked by management about this, when we would say, look, this patient requires monitoring, more frequent monitoring. And even, and then it'd be like, well, they're not a critical care patient. Well, you don't have to be an ICU patient to still have to be a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1. It's how much time and resources do we have as nurses when there's no more secretaries, there's no more CNAs, there's nobody getting supplies. Oh, we have to pick up all the food trays. It's ridiculous, right? What we have to do. Oh, well, sorry, you got to go run to pharmacy too, because we've cut all the pharmacy techs, or we no longer have pharmacy staff. So these kind of issues are exactly why we need national staffing ratios. And it also shows this vast disconnect between what our obligation is and what we are attempting so much to have people understand, and even to have other nurses understand who, with compact licenses, this is now really going to be a big issue. I have a compact license. Do I know every state's Nurse Practice Act and laws? I don't. I would never go practice just randomly somewhere because I have a license. Right. But there's a huge disconnect here between what we know is our obligation as nurses and then what is our recourse to actually impact that change. Whereas a doctor can say, well, here's what a patient needs. So I'm going to order this, this, and this. And nobody questions the ability to carry that out. But then the burden is put on nursing staff, or say it's respiratory staff when you've only got 3 respiratory therapists in a 220 bed hospital on night shift, and you need one just full time in ER and NICU. So I mean, Liz and mama nurse. I mean, if you've got babies and you got an ER, you
we love respiratory things.
Right.
That's our big issue.
Exactly. So you can only go so far. So how are people going to meet this? And I think this is also an issue that, I really want to see more respiratory therapists chime in as well, because they really I've only seen them run themselves ragged also to meet the needs of patients. So when you've got somebody, patients on lactulose, or you've got patients that are getting, you've got 2 blood transfusions going simultaneously, how do you legally sit with 2 patients at the beginning of multiple blood transfusions, and you've got potassium riders, and you've got all these multiple IVs. So I think that this is exactly, why we need national ratios, but also we have to drive acuity, and we have to, if these nursing boards are about the public safety, then they need to just really walk it and write it out, put it in law, codify it, and empower nurses to actually provide for the safety and have a voice and have some protection under the law. And also, CMS has got to get involved. We have got to get CMS involved in this, because this is just, taxpayer robbery that's happening right now in the healthcare system.
Yeah. And if you're not familiar, CMS is kind of who decides that Centers for Medicaid Services. And they are really, even though not everyone has Medicaid, since they are the government body of providing like a lot of healthcare, every single insurance company goes back and makes all their decisions based on what CMS says. So if CMS says this is safe, everyone else toes the line. And they are like the top. JCO gets there. JCO's the one that come in and they yell at you for having cups on the table and they say this is safe versus this is not safe. JCO looks at CMS to say what is safe versus not safe. So when Adrian says like we need CMS to change, it's because CMS is like the top dog. So that will trickle down to like everything else. If you don't change what CMS has the power to say, hey, nurse ratios need to be this because this is not safe. If I come into your hospital and you don't have nurse ratios of 2-to-1 for an ICU, we're not paying you. And it will shock you to know that hospitals will all immediately fall in line and be like, oh, wow. Like, so that is why voting on these things and then holding CMS accountable is at the end of the day important, especially since CMS, if you have an unsafe patient assignment and then something bad happens to your patient, because this gets more complicated. Let's say you have so many patients that you didn't get to turn your patient and then your patient develops a pressure ulcer while they are under the hospital's care. CMS looks at the hospital and says, we're not paying for that entire visit. I don't care what else happened. They could have been there for quadruple bypass and were in the hospital for 3 months, but you gave them a pressure ulcer. So we're not paying for anything. And thus we run into complications. So you would think it would be in CMS's best interest to regulate things so that less bad things would happen. But what do we know?
And it's also insurance reimbursements are based on CMS. So like if what folks need to understand is right of every dollar that's charged, so if you have let's just say $100 bill, right? Well, if CMS is going to reimburse $54 on that bill based on their codes, then the private insurance is going to give you about 10% more as a payee, as a receiver. Nobody's getting 100%, which is
just make it make sense.
It doesn't not even make sense.
Whatever you bill, it's not real. Like
it's not
when
real,
they bill you, it's like, I'm going to charge you $500. And CMS is like, that's ridiculous. I'll pay you $200. And then private insurance is like, we're better than that. I'll pay you $250. And then the hospital, if you're like, I don't have insurance, they're like, here's the cash price. It has nothing to do with anything. And you're like, what? Why?
And unless you're a disproportionate share hospital, right? So some hospitals are also disproportionate share. We call them dish hospitals. DSH. And so those hospitals get additional money from CMS to care because they're in an underserved area. So you're talking about rural areas, just areas that are highly underserved, which is actually becoming more and more, of each part of the country. I worked at a disproportional share hospital. And so, we knew that they were getting more money, more funding. And, the question then goes, okay, well, where are you putting that more money? Where does that additional money go? And there's no strings really attached to that money. It doesn't, you just get it if you qualify, if you're in the geographic area in the right zip codes under CMS.
We know where that money goes. We talked about a couple weeks ago, goes in the CEO's pocket on their bonus.
Right. Or shareholders, right. Or shareholders, or goes to expand. It goes to expansion, like where, I worked for a large company that did a lot of expansion now and is now the largest company in the country, or one of them. So it goes, even if they're not profit, it still goes into expansion and all kinds of, nonsensical areas. Expansion is not a bad thing necessarily, but again, it's just the issue here is that the public has to understand how dangerous a situation it is that it doesn't matter. A doctor giving an order doesn't just mean like, oh, there's just fairies that come out of everywhere and could provide all this care. No, there's babies that die. You guys have seen it. There are people that come in, women that come in with no comorbidities, no issues, and there's a fetal demise for no good reason, right? It's just complete negligence. And I know so many L&D nurses that's the reason they got out of it and just quit altogether, right? Or we see patients who have needs, but you're arguing and yelling, and again, I came out of a union hospital, so we had a lot more power, but again, it was always a struggle because if, a group of nurses or say travelers came in and they were just like, well, we're just, doing our thing, and not that they weren't good nurses, but because they just weren't used to flexing that muscle and, saying, hey, I'm going to just leave. I'm going to go home sick if you don't change this assignment, right? Or let's have an equitable assignment, or this is not, having 3 vent patients is not safe. And that's not the protocol or the practice. And again, it's, temporary nurses, travel nurses, registered nurses, they don't know the policies of hospitals. They don't even know what the practices are. And so, oftentimes they would look at us like we were literally making things up. And we're like, no, seriously, like none of us do this. So if you do this, like that's not going to be good for the patients. We are here about protecting the patients, and that's why we flex our union muscle because we, especially in California, but the fight for acuity, even with CDPH, was constant. And as I became a regulatory expert, that was my number one thing with 5 different counties of CDPH was fighting them over acuities versus ratios. And they still had it very open to interpretation whether or not they would actually go investigate on acuity. Even though the law is very clear in Title 22 in California.
Yeah. And the thing is, the public doesn't know this either. Like if you talk, that's kind of like why I want to come on here and like talk about this stuff in hopes that like for the YouTube gods would somehow pick it up and like send it to other people who are out, like both for us as healthcare people to learn more about the system we work in. Cause it's taken me 12 years before I'm like, what is like looking around and going like, excuse me, like what? But also for people outside of it. Cause if you talk to them, like I've talked to, I'm a very fun person at a party. Last weekend, someone was like, oh, hey, how's so-and-so? Like something about something. I was like, well, you know why that happened to you. Right. And I was like going on this rant and they were like, wow, like that was a lot of information, but like nurse ratios and like, they had no idea, but like now they do, but like most people don't know. They were like horrified. They're like, I don't really know if I believe you. And then
right.
They
You're
went
just
over
making
and like,
it all up. You're making
exactly.
it all up.
They literally were kind of just like looking at me like I was a crazy person. And they approached me later at the party. They were like, I just Googled this and like, you're right. I was like, I know, like, I know, like, but they didn't believe me.
Well, the other thing too that I keep hearing and I see on social media and I keep seeing on TikTok is this thing about malpractice insurance. Oh, it's time. Yeah, of course you should have malpractice insurance. But again, malpractice insurance is not going to protect you from criminal charges, right? If I get in a car accident because I have robbed a bank, my car insurance is not going to represent me in criminal court for robbing the bank.
And we're seeing that people are now doing it criminally, which has not been seen as much before, but now apparently we do that.
And there's different types of insurance too. There's occurrence insurance and then there's claims-based. Those are 2 distinctions that people need to understand. If you have a claims-based, then that's only going to be for that time period that you have that insurance. So if I had in 2020 insurance that's claims-based, and then in 2025, somebody brings a charge against me, I'm not covered. You have to have occurrence-based insurance unless, so this is a really important distinction that people need to understand, because even all of us, insurance is very complicated, but do not get claims-based policy, get an occurrence-based policy. This is really critical, and that you maintain that policy and know the statute of limitations.
So Adrian, I was gonna bring that up, because I know throughout my nursing career, I was always told, don't get malpractice insurance, because as a nurse, when you get it, it makes you more liable to get sued by family members and, whoever wants to sue you. Now, with this going on, would you recommend nurses to get this?
Yeah, I think one, it's a fallacy that I don't know how this myth of, you're going to get sued more if you have insurance. Well, we live in a litigious society. You're going to be sued no matter what. It's just that most nurses don't have the kind of money that doctors have. But keep in mind, a doctor can put his practice into bankruptcy. And I've had plenty of nurse colleagues who've had botched surgeries who haven't gotten a dime because those surgeons bankrupted. They bankrupted, went to bankruptcy, foreclosure on their practice. Just were like, sorry, we're dissolving the entire practice. We're going to start off over here. Nurses don't have the option to do that, right? And so again, it's very important that nurses get liability, because also the liability insurance. So you've got a couple things. You've got civil, criminal, and then you've got licensure. 3. Sorry, how many fingers do I have? So one, you definitely want to have insurance that's going to cover you and represent you in a case against the board, against your licensure board. The average civil case is going to be, $160,000 right now as a going amount for nurses on awards, the expense. The average cost of a lawyer legal fees is somewhere around $6,000. In California, you can just quadruple that. It's going to cost you, anywhere $10,000 to $20,000 to get a retainer on a lawyer, because 40% of cases in California with the Board of Registered Nursing are going to result in discipline versus a 6% average nationwide.
But you just said, though, that doctors don't have as much money as nurses, but nurses with liability insurance.
No, I said nurses don't have as much money as doctors. Doctors can go bankrupt.
But nurses with liability insurance, then it's the deep pockets theory of, lawsuits. So if they know, like someone in the chat said, don't tell anybody you have insurance, because if they know that there's a payoff there, because you could sue me personally for liability, and you can get my new flute. That's what you're going to get out of the decision.
Yeah. It's more to have that legal, but it's about that legal protection, because if you get sued, you're going to be $10,000 out of pocket for a lawyer. If you have insurance, you're only out your deductible and whatever the max is. So it's about, you're also paying for the legal protection, the legal services.
Even if it's not decided against you,
right,
just the process will bankrupt you.
That makes sense. The legal services is separate, because people, there's a saying about people who represent themselves. I won't say it here. Right. So it never goes well. So understand you're going to be sued anyways, because trial lawyers are pretty powerful, and lawyers, people like to sue, and this is, it doesn't matter. It's just like having car insurance. It depends on the kind of state. We have to get into a no fault kind of zone, though, in healthcare, because if we don't get into a no fault kind of zone in healthcare, for example, in a lot of countries that have a nationalized health service, it's no fault. You actually can't sue. So yeah, it does take some power away from the consumers, but it also provides a more equal playing field for the care.
It's a lot like when you go through federally qualified health centers, like with CMS, with Medicaid, you can't get sued really, because it's the federal government that you would be, it's the government that you would be suing.
Well, and travel nurses often don't read their contracts. I've been talking to a lot of travel nurses about hey, what is your coverage and what are you signing away? Are you signing away your right to actually criminally prosecute in your hospital if you get attacked? Are you signing, you don't have workers' comp? Are you signing away, liability to the hospital? So again, I would say as a travel nurse, yeah, absolutely. And know your practice acts.
Teresa Madison said, I was just at a meeting with a nursing student organization and or NSO, and they represented the average licensed defense was 7,500 to 8,000, just for the lawyer. And Brittany said, I could listen to Adrienne talk all day. I'm in awe of her knowledge. And yes, she has a TikTok. Please go find it. She will just provide you with endless hours of. The other day I just like went through and I was like, okay, teach me. And we will do a whole, I think, hopefully, I think we've proven that. I mean, I don't know much about malpractice insurance at all. So like maybe one day when Adrienne is available, we could do something on here and she could like help educate us and just have a panel discussion of what we do, what we know and what we don't know. Cause all of our experiences with malpractice are probably different. If she's willing to do that, or we could do it on her TikTok. Either way, just do a live over there. Either way, because I think that conversation needs to be had, because I also thought, oh, you shouldn't have insurance because then they'll sue you more. And then didn't even think of like, oh, I can't even afford a lawyer. And it's not that expensive for nurses. For nurse practitioners, it is very expensive. But for nurses, I think it was like $88 a year or something when I looked into it retrospectively. Yeah, it was like not bad. So I was like, oh, like interesting. So go check that out. And then I was going to show you also in case you are worried, if you're looking and you're nervous about like all of this makes you a little bit nervous. I took a legal course with Your Nurse Lawyer before. I don't see the one that I was in before, but one of these could be helpful, like a documentation resource guide for nurses where she kind of goes through and says like, if you're worried about it, like here's kind of document to CYA. Like if you're nervous, she has a lot of great information. She's switching over into like the business side of things, but these two are still available. It was part of whatever I had bought forever ago. I'm not like affiliated with her or anything, but she's a cool resource for this type of thing, because I feel like we don't really learn how to chart. And I'm like, I don't know, like what should I write? What should I not write? And then Adrienne's TikTok, go find it. She's helpful.
Can we talk about documentation for a second? Because I got very good advice before I was even a nurse. Remember I told you I got to shadow a nurse before I even changed majors, and she told me, always chart like a lawyer's looking over your shoulder. Now, at the time, I didn't really know what that meant, but as the years went on, I chart with the idea of somebody coming behind me and saying, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do what any other nurse would do? So for instance, when I put an NG tube in a patient, tube that goes in your nose, folks, into your stomach, for the non-medical folks in the chat. And there's a chance it could go into your lung. In fact, I did do that once when I was a baby nurse. So when I chart, then when you put it in, then you're supposed to check the lung sounds and the oxygen level and all that. And I put that all down because I want someone to come after me and look and say, oh, he put this NG tube in. But he also knew to check to see if it was in the stomach or the lungs, because he did this and he did this, and the patient was able to phonate or speak clearly. And all this is right there. So it's that kind of mindset that I got into a habit of doing when I was doing charting, is just someone comes along and says, did you do what you're supposed to do? And why didn't you do this? Did you check this? And you can't tell them verbally in court later. It's got to be in the documentation. You know, if it's not charted, it didn't happen. It's very true. That's my 2 cents on documentation. Hey, I'm sorry I'm late. I had a school meeting.
I know we talked about it when you were here.
To piggyback on that, Scott, too, like to put the name of the person, right? So if you're checking breast sounds, you're checking, placement, or if you're not, maybe the protocol is X-ray, but X-ray is broken or it's backed up, so you're not able to do that. You're going to do manual check. It's very important, if you're going against your hospital policy, that you are also bringing a second person in, and you're also putting their name in the chart. That I can tell you that placement issue is a hot one. That the Board of Registered Nursing in California loves to get people on. The other thing too,
before you continue, putting someone else's name in your chart is a big deal. You better make sure that they're on board with that, because if you put, I discussed this with this first, and they agree, or whether they're like, don't bring me into this. Don't put my name in that chart. So,
well, if they checked, I mean, it's just like anything else, right? So, I mean, I think that has to be part of the teamwork agreement, like, hey, or hey, will you put a narrative in and co-sign or edit my note or add yourself in? But it is important. So, like, if I, grab the charge nurse, I'm going to say the charge nurse, Scott, double check for me, verified placement. with me. So,
Let me get your let me get your opinion on this, because something you said earlier, and this kind of dovetails. So if you go to the charge nurse and you say, as I've told this story before, my patient is now going from the ER, my ER patient is going to the ICU. California says now this is a 1-on-1 or a 1-to-2, and I have 4 patients. So someone needs to take my other 2 or 3 patients, and they say, we don't have the staff for that. I mean, if we have our break relief do that, then nobody's going to get their lunch today. So now that's an issue. Does that go in the chart? It definitely goes on some kind of report, like for the union or an incident report, something like that. But whether it goes in the patient's chart or not is always been kind of a question, because you don't bring hospital politics into the patient chart. It's only about what happens to the patient. But if you're not one-on-one the way you should be with the patient, maybe there should be a note.
Are you saying, like, if you have, so here's something that I would chart, and I've had discussions with different people about this, and with lawyers and charting experts. So one thing that I would often put in the patient's notes, because again, you might be with one of your 4 patients, right? But then there's no context in the other patient's charts about what you're doing with that one. And so if something goes haywire with number 2, 3, or 4, how is the context? I can guarantee you they don't care. CDPH doesn't care. The BRN doesn't care. They're only going to look ICE. They will literally not even look at the totality of your charting for the day. They don't even care who the other patients are. They don't care what their diagnosis is, right? So if I had an issue and I was really up against it, I mean, I did tele and IMC, so I had vent patients. We were often going back and forth to ICU. But again, we were usually calling an RT. So if there was a staffing issue, I would say in the chart, insufficient staff to meet patient needs, chain of command utilized. Here's the charge nurse I contacted. Here's the manager I contacted, the DON at these times. And I would literally like copy and paste, because I had a little trick, because I worked informatics, where I could do a template on that and then just fill in the times and who it was. And I would put that in everybody's chart of my patients. And then I would also let management know. And I basically, be like, come for me. I dare you. I will take you down too.
Yeah, I'm thinking I would have been called to the principal's office for that. Like, you can't put this in a chart.
Right. I would literally do my job for 12 years. Please fire me, because I am not going to lose my license over your lax,
Yeah.
I would love to come sue you and be like, why did you get fired? Well, because I said that this wasn't safe.
Right. And I mean, I know it's like there's a lot of conflict about that and what's taught, but in the really what we're up against now is that we have to protect ourselves. So unless we're keeping a journal, because again, we have HIPAA, so we can't really keep a journal that's anything other than patient room, saying I did this in patient room, this or that, but we can't put names. You know what I mean? There's so many things. Again, you can have this suit come 5 years later, 3 years later. Things can get there's a bottleneck in the California Board of Registered Nursing. They're 3 years behind.
And you think you'll remember? You won't.
100% you won't.
No, you won't. Yeah, it's usually stuff where you're like, I'll never forget this, and then they come and you're like, what? Like, what? Kimberly Davis said, so I get charting to cover your ass, but what I worry about as a new grad is what if I didn't know to even do it? And that's why we're talking about this today, because it's like there is no legislation to protect people who just did not know. They're coming at you and they're saying, well, you're liable anyway. Like, and that sucks. So we need to get mad and make everyone else mad too.
My only comment to that is just make sure you know what your protocols are and your standards of practice, or not standards of practice, what do they call them? Just your protocols in your, if you have a patient that you give, for instance, you give an IV narcotic for pain. Like in my hospital, it was within the next hour, you need to check a blood pressure. No one ever did it, but that was what was on there. So, there may be those same kinds of things. If you have a patient that gets this medicine, check a glucose X number of minutes or hours later. Make sure you know what's expected so you can chart that you did what's expected, or if you didn't, if there's an exception, why that wasn't possible.
And Chelsea said it's not about protecting ourselves. It's also about protecting like our patients. If you're not protecting your patients, if you don't document it, because at the end of the day, then the hospital might get off on, you know what I mean? Like if the patient was trying to sue and you didn't document that there weren't enough resources, they might say, well, it just happened because it happened, instead of like, hey, it happened because you couldn't physically be there because you were stretched so thin. This is a hospital problem, not a nurse's problem, not whoever.
Well, and we live in a society today, especially in the United States, where it doesn't matter what you've done, only what you've been accused of. And the other facet is you're guilty until proven innocent. And it doesn't matter, regardless of, I can chart I can't chart everything. Am I supposed to chart water at bedside? Paint on the wall was white. You can't chart everything. It's impossible. And so you have to chart the best you can to remember what you did 10 years later when you're finally getting sued. And it's impossible. And I feel like everyone's job is just hanging out to dry. The hospital will never, ever, ever stand behind you. The state board will never, ever stand behind you. The minute something happens, oh, he's a rogue nurse. He never did train right. You know, we didn't ever trust him. And they'll just hang you out to dry.
Hospitals? No.
One thing that I do recommend too is that every nurse carry a journal with them of some kind in their pocket, or they use their phones to at least contextualize what the staffing is for that day. So you may not be able to put the patient information in there, but you certainly can say, hey, you know, this shift I worked, there was, you know, no secretary, there was this many patients, there's a census, there was no charge, there was only a break nurse for 3 hours, right? So at least that you have some context and you just keep that. I have like these little booklets still, these little mini books I used to carry in my side pocket in my scrubs, and I would just always be making notes. And you know, you've got to have something, because again, the hospital holds all the cards in a lawsuit. They've got all the patient records, they've got everything. You don't have access to that chart anymore. You don't have access to anything.
Well, that's true, Adrian, but even if you haul that into court, the man in the black robe with the little wooden hammer, he doesn't care about that. The state board doesn't care what your situation was. You took a report, it was your patient. And the hospital sure as heck doesn't care.
I think what we're going to get to, I like this website. I think also what we're going to get to is that nurses are going to start suing their managers. I think this is what we're going to start getting to. And what we need to start getting to is where nurses and respiratory therapists and pharmacists, they start suing back these hospitals, these administrators, these CEOs, and we start getting some class action lawsuits against these organizations and these managers and the C-suite.
How am I supposed to go up against Banner Hospital, though? I'm one nurse.
I'm saying class action. I'm saying there's a lot of ways to do that.
Okay.
And I'm not saying every nurse. I'm just saying that we do need to start fighting back. And, you know, again, through unions, that's one avenue where we're able to do that. But we've got to start fighting back, because if we don't make it painful for these organizations, nothing will change, because the public is like totally like in some cognitive dissonance about healthcare.
We got to make people mad. We got to be those party poopers. I'm trying to get an army of people that are angry. You know, it's not a good slogan though. I'm working on it. Get mad as me. People are like, no, thank you. That's, yikes. This is on the screen really quick. We were talking about nurse brains in the comment section. Nurse brains are just what you write all the information about. We were talking about, like, do you keep them? Do you not keep them? That can be a conversation for a different day, because I want to show you some sketch things really quick before we have to go. But Vanessa, Mama Nurse, has these available on her website, where she already came up with them and vetted them, and you can download them and not have to worry about having one, either a crappy one that your hospital gives you. I'm betting hers are better than that. Go check them out.
This is definitely good. I use them literally every shift that I have.
Yes. So you can go check that out. I put the link in the chat, and then I'm going to put it in the description. Boop. There we go. Okay. So you can go check those out if you're watching it on the replay. So thanks for letting me know you have that. I like that. Okay, stop. So let us look really quick, kind of to sum up our North Carolina debacle. Because in case you've listened to all of this and you're like, I'm still hopeful, I'm not worried. Here's why you're worried. Okay. We're going to figure out why you're worried. If I just want to crush all the little hopes and dreams of you optimistic people out there. Okay. So here's a scenario that the North Carolina Board of Nursing, remember, sent to North Carolina nurses and nurse practitioners and CRNAs and midwives, and said, here are some things that now you could be held liable for. Like, you could get charged, either you could go to your license court, you can get civilly charged or criminally charged if you don't do these things. We're going to go through a scenario. Nurse Beth worked at a long-term care facility and was assigned to the 200 and 300 hall from 3 to 11. During this shift, Nurse Beth was one of 3 nurses in the building. One of the residents assigned to Nurse Beth was resident P, who had a history of asthma and had been diagnosed with upper respiratory infections 2 days prior to Nurse Beth's shift. So this patient is sick. They got a cough, bronchitis or something, pneumonia. Shortly after Nurse Beth assumed care of resident P, the resident complained of shortness of breath and wheezing. Nurse Beth administered a prescribed needed nebulizer treatment, so it's like a breathing treatment to help you breathe a little bit better, at 5:30. Nurse Beth was busy assisting other residents and did not go back to check on Nurse Resident P prior to dinner break at 7. Reminder that Nurse Beth has 200 and 300 halls. She probably has like 50 patients, okay? Long-term care. When Nurse Beth returned from her dinner break at 7:30, which she probably didn't take, she's probably just been running around like a maniac the whole time, trying to just make sure everyone else has all their breathing treatments, isn't dying. She noticed resident's P's call light was on. Nurse Beth did not go into the resident's room to check on the resident because it was time for her to begin her nighttime medication pass. Then she did not want to get behind. I think we've all probably done something like that where we're like, hang on, I'm sure it's fine. Like, I need to go give so-and-so his other breathing treatment so he doesn't stop breathing, because you have 50 patients, right? 50 patients to pass meds on, okay? Nurse Beth proceeds with her medication pass until approximately 8:30 when a nursing assistant approached her, concerned that resident P was unresponsive. Hi, I have mild concerns. First of all, wouldn't you just hit a button? Like, I'm hoping that this person would have hit a button instead of being like, hi, concerned when you have a moment. Patient P, not breathing, might be fine, not fine. When a nursing assistant approached her, concerned that resident P was not responsive, Nurse Beth finished pulling and administering the medicine for the current resident before going into resident P's room. I can't fathom a situation where this would happen, but let's go. When she found the resident unresponsive with no pulse or respirations, Nurse Beth was unsure of resident P's code status and left the resident to go to the nurse's to check the code status book. Interesting situation they're posing. Nurse Beth determined that resident P was a full code and called a code overhead to alert everyone on site. And then Nurse P got in trouble, I'm assuming. What steps could Nurse Beth have taken to provide appropriate care for this patient? Have you ever been in an emergency situation where you felt like care was delayed or not delivered according to an established guideline? If so, what do you think contributed to that deviation? So, Nurse P, nurse probably should have done something different and like gone and gotten help, but it then goes on to kind of talk about how, like, if you didn't go into the room, like, that was a mistake, number one, and going through all the different things that now nurse did wrong about not going in and addressing the situation. And this one isn't even as bad as the next one. It's a little bit unrealistic. I don't think too many people will be like, your patient is unresponsive. And you're like, hold on 1 minute, please. I'm crushing this pill. If you just give me a moment, like, no one's going to do that. But I could very much see you having 50 patients and missing a call light, or having someone come and say, I think a much more realistic situation would be someone, maybe a nursing assistant coming and saying, they just don't feel good. You know what I mean? Like, hey, so-and-so is just saying they really don't feel good. And then how would that get, then they would come back and the nursing assistant's like, well, I told her, I told him. And then nothing happened. You came back and checked on them and they were dead. Like, and North Carolina, per the Board of Nursing, is saying, well, that's your fault. You didn't do your job. Like, because again, we don't have mandated ratios, but they're holding this all under like what to do. As a learning experience, please, if someone ever tells you so-and-so looks funny or is unresponsive, those are not good words, and you should just go. Looks funny, something is off. Just go and look. I've had people come and tell me that my patient seemed a little bit distressed, and I go in and they were completely unconscious, foaming at their mouth, and their blood sugar was 2. So like, people will underplay what is happening, and just go check. Thoughts from the room before we read the next one, which is worse.
First, don't leave your patient.
Yeah.
Like, if
you're coding, them, exactly.
Yeah, don't leave.
Don't. Excellent other point.
Well, one, know the code status. I want to know about Jennifer. I'd actually like to know, is this the same Jennifer who's like the
Oh, yes, Jennifer. I tried Googling her really quick.
C-suite, right?
I think I was trying to Google her before this live, and then I didn't fully get to go into my investigation. Jennifer is the person who wrote this document, and wait till we see her next scenario. It's interesting, but yes, I'd like to know who Jennifer is.
Yeah,
at the Board of Nursing. Any other thoughts before we move on? But excellent, Vanessa. I'm glad you pointed that out, because yeah, if you find somebody and they're not responsive, never leave. I have had people do that. I mean, poor I've had people like, just don't do that. I've had people come up to me and be like, your patient, they're not breathing and they don't have a pulse. And I'm like, and you came and found me what? They're like, I'm afraid to push the button. I'm like,
Same.
no. Yeah. I'm like, no. Like,
And it's a caution for families to always make sure that the code status, there's some way, that's a good question to ask in long-term
like
care.
the first,
how are you
I would say
designating?
the first question, even if you don't get through your whole admission assessment, if you are ever in charge of someone's life, you're like, if you stop breathing and try to die on me, what would you want me to do? Like, before we proceed, I need
It sounds
to
like
know.
there's some kind of a structural problem here, because there should be a code status on their wristband. They all have ID bands. There should be some policy in place where you don't have to, that would avoid that part, that piece of this disaster.
True.
Agreed. DNR status is usually on some kind of orange wristband or something that stands out and glows in the dark.
Right.
Mhm.
Like
And look for that.
all risk, those things.
Before, if you find someone who's not alive, look up around their room or look on their appendages before you start CPR. Because I've also been in a lot of situations where people started doing and then it's very awkward if you've already started to code someone who is a DNR. That is a tricky situation of, do you stop? What if you got them sort of back, but now they need intubation and they had said, don't ever intubate me? Like, problems.
Because I was going to say, wouldn't you want to, err towards starting compressions, even if they're not needed, and then you can always stop. But yeah, you're right. That what if they do come back and now they're,
No, once you stop, you're committed until until the prevailing authority comes in and calls it.
Yeah.
I've been in many awkward in between.
Oh, I've been in a couple of codes where rigor mortis has set in and some CNA started CPR already. You're like,
yeah,
why?
Yeah. Because and then it's
or slow codes. Slow codes are another phenomenon. I don't know if we want to get into, but
we can have a whole different conversation about that someday.
That sounds like another Oprah.
So scenario 2. This is one that I think would be, was it scenario 2 or scenario 3? There was one. Oh, okay. Yes, this one. This one makes me nervous because this is this I could see happening. Basically, what happened in this one is there's a patient. They're admitted for like a GI bleed. I'll summarize it for you. They are monitoring their hemoglobin and hematocrit, like seeing how much is this patient bleeding. The nurse has a bunch of patients. She goes out and she's taking care of all of her other patients. This is on like a med surg floor, and a nursing assistant comes and they tell the nurse, hey, they've been having a lot more bloody output. And the nurse says, okay, they're going to come. It's 5:30 in the morning. They're about to come draw a another lab draw. And it's going to come back, and I'm just going to see what that one says. Like, let's see what that one says. And then we'll come in and we'll like reevaluate. I don't know exactly how much it is. It said they were like busy and they were doing something with someone else. And then the patient ended up becoming unresponsive. It turns out they had lost like a ton of blood, and they never did the labs because the patient was unresponsive. They came back and they said, this would be an example of when you would be negligent because you did not intervene and do something. Because a CNA came and told you, hey, they're losing more blood. You should have gone in and intervened, maybe gotten the lab draw early. It goes on to say in like the discussion, like you should have gotten the lab draw earlier. You should have brought in people. But in reality, having worked on a GI med surg floor all the time, I would have done probably very similarly to what this nurse in the example of a bad nurse did. I have a patient, I know they've been pooping out blood all night. Everyone knows, the resident knows, everyone knows. I'm in a different room with a patient who's also not doing well because I have 5 patients who are all getting blood and having insulin drips. And I'm looking at it, and the nurse CNA comes in and says, hey, it's 5:30. They're still pooping blood. I'm like, I know. I got it. They don't say anything about a status update of like, oh, they're not like, I can't wake them up. Like that would be a really important thing, but they didn't say that here. They just said, hey, they've been pooping a lot. And I'm like, I know, that's why they're here. They're going for a scope in the morning. We're getting another lab draw in literally 30 minutes. Let's see what their hemoglobin comes back in. If it's in the toilet, we'll let them know to come early. Like that is exactly what I would have done. Like,
well, yeah, but so I'm the nurse there. I go in, look at the patient. Yep. So I go call the doctor, and what does the doctor say? Just watch them. I'll be in a couple hours.
We're getting their labs in half an hour. We'll see what the crit comes back at.
Right. What did it avail me?
Yep.
What could I have done more than call the doctor? He blows me off or she blows me off, and now I'm going to be criminally liable because I didn't do. If I do anything that's practicing medicine without a license.
Yep.
So
and that is what.
Let's be careful though. I don't know that we're really talking about criminal liability unless something came up in this chat before I got here. But we were talking about civil liability, right?
So it can be any. So I was looking into that, Scott, and I went into the North Carolina Board. It said it just reversed a thing saying that nurses can't be held liable. So it said usually you would be held in your state board of nursing court or civil, but it could go to criminal if they deemed it necessary. And when I read that situation that the board of nursing set out as like, if you did do this, you would be held liable to some degree, I was like, well, that's terrifying, because even if you did like Chad said and you notified them and said, hey, it went on to detail, like, you should have escalated it. I would like, if
right, because we're getting into like involuntary manslaughter, we're getting into criminal negligence. I mean, this is fine line. All it takes is a DA who wants to get reelected.
Who came in and said, you ignored that. They told you and you ignored it.
And even if you escalate it, like you said, like you said, Liz, what's the next guy going to say? Well, what did Johnson tell you? He said, "Not worry about it." Okay, then we're not going to worry about it.
Yeah.
How many chief medical officers do you know that back the nurse instead of the doctor? It just doesn't happen.
Yep.
And now I'm because I didn't.
As well, then you call the nursing supervisor or your manager and say, hey, I need you to advocate for this patient. They're not listening to me. If they don't do it, then you go to the, chief nursing officer, up the nursing. And then maybe you can say, I've done all I can do.
What if it doesn't even send your alarm bells? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah,
then that's what makes me nervous, is like all patients can flip like that. And if you have a bunch of GI bleeders, they poop all day. Like they're just going to poop all day. They're going to bleed because it irritates their colon. Like, and they tank, like usually they poop and poop. Like that just like the things that make me nervous are things that I wouldn't see as like glaring alarm bells. Like, and having worked on a unit exactly like that, I had 5. None of them could walk. I would have 2 incontinent GI bleeding patients who I can't be everywhere. I'm changing one of them. I'm giving chemo in another room. In the other one, I'm giving blood, like all at the same time. Like, and then I have like poor grandma who has so much dementia and we don't have anyone to sit with her, and she's falling out of bed and like, oh, it's med pass time. Like,
but when it comes to what happens with like, for say this GI bleed patient goes south, whatever happened to the standard of what would a reasonable nurse with your experience and education in that situation do? So as far as like civil liability, or I guess even for regulatory trials as well, with the board, you're held to, what is the standard you're held to? The superhuman nurse who has a, 20 years experience and a doctoral degree and,
well, like in Redonda Voss case, she was held to a standard of a nurse who hadn't been at the bedside for 40 years.
Like, so the thing that makes me,
5 CNAs on a floor for 30 patients. And
like if you get a bad person who's going to come in and make it be like it kind of comes down to then the legal nurse consultant that you get, because I have been involved in situations of legal things where one of like a nurse consultant came in and she was like, well, I would never do that. Like, this is totally normal. And the people believed her. I've also been in situations where someone said like, no, this was a very normal action. And the jury literally was like, or the judge was like, I don't know. Like, I don't think so. Like, disagree.
Let's also like look at it here, right? Like, if we're in a jury situation, right? Like say it's criminal, right? I mean, let's just face it, right? If you've got a jury and the jury does not reflect the color or ethnicity of that person on the stand, and then you've got an expert witness that matches the ethnicity of the jury,
and it's a sad case,
you're pulling you don't know what the outcome's going to be. So let's we got to talk about that too.
I know that it's possible that people can be charged criminally. It depends on the DA and that kind of thing. We haven't seen it, as far as I'm aware, we haven't seen a spate of nurses being charged criminally for things. So more likely it's going to be a civil liability. And that's what I'm talking about. When nurses watching this are like, or new nurses, like, I'm scared now, to be practicing. Like if I make a mistake, I can be sued and held liable, and I should have insurance for this and all of that. And I mean, part of me wants to say, don't worry, because if you do your best, it should be okay. But you're held to you're not held to the highest standard possible. You're held to the standard. I mean, you're supposed to be anyway. Held
Of a
to the
reasonable,
reasonable nurse. Would any, so Nurse Liz takes care of that GI bleed patient. She tanks, she codes, she dies. Someone says, hey, Nurse Liz wasn't doing her job. Then we come in and say, hey, you know what? I would have made the same kind of judgment. Vanessa would, Adrienne would. Any nurse who has worked in this area for a while knows that wasn't necessarily a warning sign that the patient continued to bleed, because that's why they were here. And you did respond, and you did call the doctor, like Chad suggested. So you did what a reasonable nurse would do, and that's supposed to keep you from liability. That's supposed to keep you out of court. Now, is that not true anymore?
Well, the Board of Registered Nursing in California, let me tell you guys a really quick story. I worked with a nurse who was one of the most senior nurses in the hospital I worked in. She was amazing, been there 30 years. When we went to an EHR and I worked in informatics, I told everybody, I said, in administration, I said, we have all these standing orders that now we've gotten rid of because we've gone to an EHR, and all these nurses are going to be very confused about, put the check the O2 sat, or, if O2 is below 92, put them on 2 liters, whatever it might be, from the ER up to the floors, right? Well, sure enough, here's what happened. A patient comes up from the ER. I'm not exactly sure the sequence of events. The nurse puts the patient on oxygen before she gets an order. The patient dies. Was the patient going to die anyways? Who knows, right? The patient's family, very high ranking in the community, very powerful in the community. This nurse spent about $100,000 in legal fees, did not have insurance, never worked again, lost her license. You don't have due process in the Board of Registered Nursing in California, by the way. There's no public information about any cases, so lawyers are completely crippled because they have no clue how any other cases go, because all of that is completely sealed information. And it's not like even civil courts, right? So again, this was a nurse who just completely dragged out. She lost her job, lost the last few years of her pension, right? Her reputation, and over oxygen, and because she was accused of practicing medicine without a license.
And that's exactly what I just said. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And to Scott's remark, about being a reasonable nurse standard, that works fine until you get a moderately good attorney and a pissed off jury. And then it's all down the tank. It just doesn't work anymore. And I did the best I could. I was a one-man show. I had 7 patients all to myself. I had one bleeding out on the floor and the other having a seizure. Who do I go to first? Well, it doesn't matter who you go to first, because who you went to second is one that's going to sue you. And they don't care that you had somebody else bleeding on the floor. It just doesn't matter. They don't care.
It doesn't. And there's no jury in a Board of Registered Nursing. So by the way, they just make unilateral decisions. So you don't,
and they do
process.
The Board of Nursing is self-elected, self-appointed, and self-governing. So there's no way to oust them, no way to correct their mistakes or anything else.
But thank you, Scott, for trying to be hopeful. We appreciate you.
Well, not only that, but maybe the question, because once you are sued for liability, you're screwed, because there's no accountability at the Board of Nursing, and it depends on the jury and depends on the lawyer. In civil court, the reasonable nurse standard may or may not help you. So I guess the real question is, how big of a problem is this? How frequently are nurses sued for liability for a bad outcome? And how can you protect yourself? And one way is know the standards and practice carefully. Talk to, stand up against bad staffing, and get out of situations that put your license at risk if it's unsafe. If you can't change the system, get out of it, get into another system. So those are my questions for anyone who knows. I'm guessing it's Adrienne. How often nurses are sued? Is it worth worrying about? And is the way to protect ourselves to practice safely?
If there's any other lawyers that watch this video later, my understanding is 92% of civil lawsuits across the board, whatever category, result in settlement. Only 8% of civil lawsuits are even tried. Nobody tries cases anymore. It's too expensive. The courts are backed up. So then what you end up with is an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, so nobody knows. That's the answer. So, is it going to settle if you
Well,
if
no.
you have insurance? But again, you may settle, and that settlement may be you're going to, it's your house, right?
Well,
but again, that information is not really known because it doesn't become public information. It gets
And that
Well,
NDA
I mean,
clouds transparency, and it doesn't make for any, 10 years down the road, there's no case law on this because it's all
Exactly.
sealed.
exactly.
And when they go and say, why did you get fired from this job?
You
Why
can't
haven't you been
say.
practicing? You can't even say anything. You're like,
so when they
Now,
see,
if they change these laws, like how North Carolina is going to do, are they going to open up these cases so that there's more like back history on what's going on?
yeah,
Probably not.
I doubt it. I'm going to find out. I'm a compact nurse in North Carolina. So let me
But
find out.
but my question is, when if you sue a nurse, isn't there a record of that? Don't you have to file a lawsuit against the nurse? So can't that be counted? Can we count how many nurses are sued? Or are you saying that they're settled without it even being filed as a lawsuit? It's just a threat of a lawsuit and then they settle.
It could be both. So yeah, of course, there is
Either
a
way.
record. Yeah, there will be a record. That would be for somebody who has like endless amount of time and 500 legal assistants to do, or is doing some there's some body that Yale wants to do some giant research project, because really it's just there's not a way to scrub the court files, unfortunately, in a very easy way.
yeah, because it wouldn't say like nurse so-and-so. It would be,
Wrongful death or
Susie versus, yeah.
I mean, the bottom
That's-
line is like if people are not advocating for themselves and we were not really uniting, and again, you guys know I'm an advocate for unions, but I mean, we don't have any other collective voice that is really out there to advocate for healthcare workers across the board, right? Because like in this situation, right, let's get back to the case study, right? If you have an adequate number of CNAs, then as a nurse, you can delegate and say, hey, can you go take their vitals every 15 minutes for the next 2 hours or every 30 minutes for me? And then I'll check your numbers and then I'll be able to peek in. And then I've shown I've delegated, right? We don't even have anybody to delegate to anymore in healthcare. And this is the problem. We are working in coal mines. Healthcare is the coal mine of the 21st century. If nobody cares what's happening behind that wall, and the public does not see.
I agree. And I actually responded to a rapid response with a GI bleed patient. And what I did, because it was overnight, I took a picture of the blood itself so that the doctor could make the determination on if it was a large amount, because everybody's interpretation of the amount of blood is going to be different. So that was a way that we were able to figure out if we needed to escalate this or not.
Hi, baby.
we have a new member to the panel to
Do you have a new member to the panel?
We were sad. Our babysitter left and we were sad. This is Piper.
Hi, Piper.
Hi, Piper.
Hi, Piper.
I know. He's so difficult.
Yes, I mean, these, when we get into these like case studies, and I mean, I'm reading this and I'm like, I'm just kind of astounded. I can't even really say the language I want to use about this person who wrote this. I'm love to have a conversation with them. But I mean, this is like pie in the sky. It's all written basically. So now this continuing education course is going to be used against nurses, right? So again, North Carolina nurses understand, travelers working in North Carolina read this. I don't know if travelers are going to be required to do this. I don't think so. I mean, I'm not held to anybody else, other states' CE requirements other than the 2 states that I'm, mainly licensed in. But, every traveler, they should be putting this and sharing this on all the boards, all the Facebook groups and with their people, because this is very dangerous, because this now says that this will be used against you. And these are very nebulous situations here. These are not very concrete.
No, that's what I think the problem is it's so open-ended and up to interpretation, and it's up to whatever someone thinks is reasonable or unreasonable. And I think it could be a good discussion to have a different whole chat about like things that you would do to protect your license. Like ways to chart, ways to decline assignments, just to help people who are feeling nervous, because it's difficult. These conversations are hard because on the one part, they're important, but they're also scary at the same time, like due to their very nature, right? For like all the nursing students that are watching. And so I think having something like that where we could say, hey, here's what I did, like that I found to be helpful and protective of my license. Because so that we offer I'm not going to like sugarcoat it and say, oh, this is like actually totally fine. Like, no, this sucks. But we need to do stuff about it. And then in the meantime, like, here's kind of some things that you can do to help. So I know I'm like these scare a lot of people.
Well, I mean, these nurses in North
And-
Carolina, I mean, I got some shade. I get shade for, not being nice to travel nurses. I love nurses. I love travel nurses. The issue is be educated and understand that you can be there for the money and that's fine, but you got to be there for the patients, because if you're taking 7 patients, 8 patients, 10 patients, your license is still on the line. And these are human beings you're caring for. And yeah, it's great. Get your money. But at the same time, what are we doing collectively to really help and improve patient care and the patient experience and the safety of patients? And we're leaving a disaster for the next nurse coming on. And it's this diminishing return for the patient, experience. And nurses are walking off the job. They're going to lose their license because they're just getting so overwhelmed and flustered. That's what's sad to me, is if you get in these situations and now you're a traveler or you're a staff nurse and you're getting, 7, 8, 9 patients or 10 patients, no aid, a slew of orders. It's just impossible. It is an impossible task to care for these patients in other states. I mean, again, leave California, take a trip, Scott, to come outside of California and experience a real world like I have, where I'm just like, bye, I'm not going back to bedside. Peace out. I mean, it was already bad enough in California.
That makes sense why Scott has so much optimism. I was trying to figure out, I'm like, what do you eat for breakfast, Scott? But then that makes sense. You work in California.
It's still tough. It's still tough. I mean, because the acuity of the patients is just going up, 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 the expectations, the unlimited visitor hours, the no regulations of anybody in the hospital, no, just all of it, the treatment overall of nurses, of hospital staff, whether or not you've got phlebotomists, some hospitals require nurses to draw labs. Again, all of that should be offloaded of nurses. All of the tasks that can be given to somebody else in their role should be done and given to nurses. Because the other component that, when do we think? There's so much that I have done for patients because I've had a minute to think and caucus. The patient that had botulism poisoning from bad heroin, of which we've had 3 cases in the entire United States, that no doctor wanted to diagnose, and this man was going to die. I had the chance to meet with 5 different nurses around the hospital to say, hey, come take a look at this. What is this? What do you think? Okay, great. We got the diagnosis. The CDC flew out the serum, right? I mean, nurses need to have time to think. We need to have time to reflect and consider the plan of care and problem solve, right? We're not just these little task rabbits running around. That does not help the patients,
No. And until you have a non-bedside job, I had no idea. Until I saw my husband having a normal job, I'm like, they let you eat and pee, and sometimes you just sit,
and at 2 different times you get to pee and eat separately.
Yeah, exactly. You just get to why are you on YouTube? He's like, well, you're not working 100% of the time. I'm like, it does not compute. No, I don't get it.
You are right. I have had a kind of charmed existence for a while. I didn't always live in California, but throughout my career, I did work in places that seemed like it had adequate staffing, and that I don't think anyone I know, and this isn't scientific, I don't think any nurse I know has ever been sued. I think a couple have been deposed, but so yeah. And so in my experience, what's all the worry for? If you do a good job, you're not going to get sued. But apparently, different hospitals and different facilities and even different states, it sounds like the atmosphere is different and the risk is different. So,
and the chat needs you. We appreciate you.
I do take your point.
But we appreciate you for being you, and we're just giving you a hard time.
Well, we've had some pretty good attorney generals in California too.
It's fair because they have someone come in and go, "Don't worry, it's all fine," and then realize he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's fine where he is, but that's important to point out, and I accept that criticism.
Well, and different hospitals, different states, different hospital systems, different staffing ratios. Sometimes the environment is very accusatory and non-forgiving. And like I said, you're guilty until proven innocent. And just all these things you pile up on you, and you don't know where to go. You don't know what to do. There's nowhere to turn. There is no help. And yeah, it really stinks.
Yeah, we definitely have to get the public behind us as healthcare workers, and for all healthcare workers. And, again, the CNAs, the housekeepers, the phlebotomists, the people working the kitchen, right? More security in hospitals. I mean, This is a team that takes a lot of people to keep people healthy in a hospital and be participating in that wellness, and have your patients taken care of, your family members taken care of. This is especially, I just feel like for the OB and L&D community, you guys need so much support. You guys need like a lot of help. And I've just seen the decimation of scrub techs, everybody, just no secretaries, no aides, right? Just people running ragged in these departments.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like we could keep this conversation going forever. But I am now in charge of these lovely humans, and it might make my productivity a little bit lessened.
They're so
But
cute.
I think we could, I want to keep like I said, I think these are going to be good topics to continue on whatever platform we end up doing it at, whether it's on Adrian's TikTok. Hopefully we can get some of it back over here too, for just we can do it on both, you know what I mean? Like for searchability purposes. But I want to get people mad. That's the point. And if you think of a good slogan, we need a slogan about being mad. So if you're a slogan type person, we need one about getting mad, and we need to get other people mad. Because that's Chad. Yes, we're going to say hi to everyone in just a moment. And yeah, so thanks for being here. Thank you, panel members. I think this was a really good discussion. Final thoughts.
So one more question. How do we get the public to wake up? How do we get the public on our side? That's the question.
It's a really good question. I've been screaming at YouTube, but it doesn't work. So if anyone else has any ideas, I'm like, maybe someone who's browsing their YouTube and is like, I want to watch funny videos. Here's a really angry woman in a thumbnail about a hospital. No one clicks on those. So share with everyone. If you do like the video and if you do compressions an odd number of time, that does help. And then if anyone does have any other ideas of things to get other people mad, yes, Chelsea, join next week. Don't be in school, play hooky. Let me know, because I really don't know. You know what I mean? This is what I do, but maybe one of you are legal masterminds and you know of a way, because I think we all just kind of have to show up in whatever way we are in. Yeah. Nurse Adrian is going to rule the world. And she doesn't know this, but I'm never letting her leave any sphere that I'm in. I'm just going to be showing up everywhere. I'd be like, please, I'm coming with you.
I think billboards. We need an anonymous for nurses is what we need.
That would be great. Yeah, where you could
I have my subversive, history, so that I kind of lean that way.
And underpaid nurse. I think we could get underpaid nurse with us, because she said she's always in the principal's office, which is my life exactly. That describes my personality to a T. I'm going to sign off here. Well, I'm going to let everyone say their final words, but Avery wanted to say hello. Would you like to say hi?
Hi.
Hi. Yes, this is Vanessa, Adrian, Chad, and Scott, and the whole internet.
That was
What? Oh, this is Avery, and this is Piper. She wanted to introduce you. Would you like to say hi? Anything, Piper?
Hi.
Hi. How old are you, Avery?
5.
Awesome. And anything else you want to tell the internet? A hopeful message. This has kind of been a serious conversation. Is there anything nice that you could tell them?
Have
a great day.
You say it?
Avery says, have a great day.
Wow.
Perfect. Okay. Final thoughts from all of you. I'm going to mute myself.
I'm sitting here talking to her. I'm like, Avery. I'm like, oh, I'm muted. No wonder she's not answering me. I'm like, Avery, is it going to be a happy day? What do you want to tell us? And oh, damn it. So, hi. Sorry I'm late. Sorry I'm clueless. I'll do better next time. It's good seeing everybody. Great discussion as always.
What we're doing isn't working. We have to change something.
Agreed. If anyone thinks of something, let us know. And like underpaid nurse said, righteousness doesn't pay the bills, which is very true. It's a current problem in my life. I just want to scream at YouTube all day, and then YouTube's like, well, we don't really pay you for that. So problem. So very true. If anyone could figure out how we can get people mad, but also pay us, bonus points.
Definitely agree. I just kind of feel like the Redonda case kind of opened up the floodgates of retaliation against nurses, if I'm just being frank about it. So hopefully things will change soon.
Yeah. And we still have to, we have to really focus on our nurses of color and really understand and be united together. And we don't need everybody. We just need the right people.
The angry people. Okay?
Stick up for each other. Just don't be silent. Stick up for each other.
That's it. Yeah. Just don't be silent. All right, friends. Thanks for joining us here today. Avery also wanted to let you know that she has baby teeth.
Yay!
That was her good news of the day. And yeah, we'll keep these conversations going. Thank you everyone who's on the panel. This was like super duper helpful and invaluable. Like I said, like, comment, share, just send it to random people who you want to make mad. If you're like, are you having a bad day? And they're like, yes, you're like, here, it's going to get worse. Just instead of spread joy, just spread sadness and anger. So that's my positive message. I hope you remember that you, my friends, are not alone. We're all mad too. You can do hard things.
Aww,
and you are more than enough.
Puppy.
A cute puppy. It is a cute puppy, isn't it? Let's end with a picture of Scott's puppy. Perfect. Oh, there's two puppies.
Puppy,
Oh,
two
two
puppies.
puppies. Oh, here they are. Oh, this was good. This was good. Perfect.
Puppy.
Dr. Mike, if anyone knows how to find Dr. Mike or Z-Dog, yes, they do have pretty good angry. Well, Dr. Mike's not angry. How do we get Dr. Mike angry? Dr. Mike is too good looking to be angry. We love the dogs. Do you like the dogs, girls?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Oh,
they're-
that'd
oh,
be cute.
oh, so cute. They are so cute. All right, friends. We'll see you later. Goodbye. Say bye to the doggies.
Bye-bye,
Are you going to say bye to everyone else too?
Bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye.
Okay,
bye-bye,
let's see. And then we hit
bye-bye.
this button. Watch, and the screen's going to turn pink. Boop.
What? Every color.
Yeah, it's every color. It's like a rainbow. Isn't that pretty?
Wow. Why did you want to show us it?
I just thought it was beautiful.
Hey.